While scrolling through Twitter, I happened to come across an article from NBC Los Angeles called McMansions for the Homeless. Some LA tents are so big, they have showers, AC, and even tiki bars. And upon reading this title, I decided I wanted to make a video on it, especially because I noticed that there's a video in here that we can look at, and we can look at that in a minute. But examining that title, I think it's kind of scary to me that the focus is not on there are people without proper shelters, but rather there are shelters for people being constructed that allow homeless people to kind of thrive in some way or to have nice things, as if homeless people don't deserve nice things. As an anarchist, I have a tendency to believe, and by tendency I mean I full on believe, that housing is a human right, that people have a right to the dignity of a home and should be able to make use of such a place. I am also of the belief that if a home is not provided for said people, that we as a society have committed a public act and public crime against them, and they have the right to use public resources as a way to maintain themselves. If we are not, as a society, dealing with a very deep and personal issue for these people, such as having a roof over your head. And I know that my take is generally very left-leaning. There are cases across the board, including very conservative capitalist perspectives to deal with homelessness. Maybe I'll have to address that in the video, but with that said, let's take a look.
During this pandemic, LA's streets of shame have gone wildly unchecked. We've seen some homeless tents popping up with electricity, running water, some even big enough to block entire sidewalks. The I-Team's Joel Grover shows us tonight these increasingly large tents can come with a host of public health and safety problems.
Wait a minute, check it out. City sanitation workers invited the I-Team to look inside this double-wide tent that had its own working shower, a kitchen with a grill and a range hood, air conditioning, even a doorbell.
So basically, you found a tent, right? Like this person has found a way to be able to find a way to clean themselves, has found a way to cook food, to have a sort of right to personal privacy with a doorbell, and generally maintain, in their circumstances, a reality in which they are able to preserve some sort of privacy, dignity, and housing respect. This is nothing that we would not expect from the type of housing that I would like to see these people given and presented. That I think all people deserve, and that most people who are probably watching this have in some level. I don't see an issue with them taking the steps to procure that for themselves.
The tent had electricity because it was illegally tapping into a nearby streetlight.
When did these stop being our sidewalks? When did they stop being the public sidewalks?
So this kind of argument always, one, does not have any merit to me, but two, always puts the blame of homelessness on the person who is homeless, rather than dealing with it as a structure. The issue that she's having is not the fact that homelessness exists. It's the fact that she has to see it. When you have to confront that in your face every day, and you have to feel that little bit of feeling that, wow, it really kind of sucks that, you know, people have to live in a certain condition, and it makes you kind of confront that side of capitalism that people don't like to talk about, because we'd like to talk about the side of capitalism where you can be wealthy and make it big and the American dream and all that. But we don't like talking about the flip side of that, which is that people can end up without food, water, shelter, or resource. And so she is more interested in the, I guess, aesthetic of having to see people who are homeless rather than actually dealing with the homeless problem. I don't see people like her offering solutions. I don't see her people like her typically when they comment on this stuff talking about how to actually address the wound, the societal wound that we are describing right now.
When the pandemic began, the city decided not to touch most homeless tents to try and prevent the spread of the virus.
That is perfectly reasonable. You're generally not going to want to mess with the little bit of housing that people have and the little bit of security that they have and ability to distance from one another. And, during a pandemic, it makes sense that the city responded in kind. Would it have been better if there was a way to find any available housing for these people and allow them to move into it? Sure. But given the alternatives, as horrible as it is, leaving them alone and genuinely letting them be is probably a lot better than messing everything up and potentially crowding them into either a shelter or just generally taking away the shelters that they have. Which honestly just doesn't feel like a good thing to say. It doesn't feel like enough. But the reality is having even this semblance of a home, and I mean, they're making it into a home, right? Having a semblance of a shelter, I should say, is a lot better than not having any shelter at all, especially during the pandemic.
So tents have been getting bigger and bigger, like this one under the 101 freeway in Hollywood with its own slide. Nearby,
Homeless people are not allowed to have fun. If you see a homeless person having fun, we're going to shame it on television. Like, that's what I'm seeing here. Maybe I'm missing the point of why you're mentioning the slide, because it's coming in kind of the same vein as the shower and everything else. As if people don't have some sort of inclination to build certain things for themselves. And I think that's the other thing that kind of infuriates capitalists who tend to see this and as more conservative-minded people, because I think what it does is it reminds them that people in this type of situation are still innovating and creating. They're still finding ways to procure their needs, including having a little bit fun with life, like having a slide. Like, I see that as a relatively harmless thing. And I think that when you get into these types of arguments with people, that they don't want to confront the reality that they're finding innovative ways to take care of themselves. And they're more worried about legality than actually providing care.
we saw a tent with walls and a roof made of mattresses. In Venice, one tent had its own wading pool, another tent had its own tiki bar. And we found no shortage of tents illegally tapping into city fire hydrants for water and into city streetlights for electricity.
See, this is what I'm talking about. Like, they emphasize the word illegal as if the society itself isn't on some level responsible for providing some care for the people here. Like, even the most conservative arguments, you want to provide people housing and shelter and basic needs because, one, if you are able to provide these people housing, then you're able to take away a lot of people like her, who we're probably about to see again, from getting upset and distressed and seeing the problems inherent in capitalism. And a lot of people will be forced to. So even on that side of things, but more importantly, when you take this particular population and you give them proper housing, they have time to sort out whatever issues has them in homelessness in the first place. And eventually, they'll be able to take some of that innovativeness and work towards something like, I don't know, getting a job and working for somebody else and making somebody else rich in capital. That's the conservative argument in a nutshell. like even from that far-reaching place, it is generally a moral good to deal with this issue rather than just talk about how it bothers you to see it.
They are doing things that are obviously against the law and dangerous. No one is inspecting. No one's checking.
Some of these
Okay, so send somebody in to start inspecting to see if the wiring is being done and the plumbing is being done in some decent way until we can find some sort of available housing. If there is no housing, build it. If there is some form of housing available, have the government take over unused properties and, I don't know, allow people to live there. If there's a situation where the government doesn't feel like stepping in because maybe that's too much, like, to clear that kind of eminent domain on unused properties, incentivize landlords in order to provide space for these people. At the very least, this is a society-wide problem. These people exist. They deserve to be acknowledged and respected. The end. That is it. They have a right to exist in front of you. It is the society's failure. It is a public failure to have people living on the street.
McMansion tents have flammable materials inside, and when they go up in flames, like this tent under the 405 at Venice Boulevard, entire neighborhoods are put in danger. But the big tents create other problems too.
So yeah, like, I acknowledge the fact that some of this is potentially dangerous. So deal with it. So deal with the actual problem. So deal with the actual issue instead of blaming the people who are living there trying to struggle. Find a way to provide them actual housing. They're doing the best they can.
This encampment made it hard for city workers to access the DWP meter. The landlord says DWP employees refuse to go near the tents to read the meter and threaten to turn off the building's power.
They wanted my tenant to go do it for them.
Lisa Rich owns that building, which has been surrounded by a...
Which just goes to prove what I was saying. Like, nobody wants to actually deal with the issues. We're sitting here talking about, well, who's supposed to check on the DWP thing? Like, why don't you, instead of trying to avoid having to send people into that environment, deal with it? Send some city sanctioned social workers in and start trying to talk to people and find out what they need. Start dealing with a very societal ill and a societal evil that is not the people themselves, but the situation of homelessness. Find ways to provide shelters, find ways to start moving people into those homes, and then you can go back to being capitalist. And then you don't have to acknowledge that these people exist anymore. You can go about your life and be relatively happy. But again, when their access to any form of human dignity that is just being denied them is undervalued over your discomfort with their existence, you're in the moral wrong. There is no argument that anyone could present me that would tell me otherwise.
A growing encampment that has caught fire, endangering the homeless as well as other people working inside the building.
It's very depressing.
See, that just tells me even more incentive under capitalism to start getting some of these people into this space. By having all these tents out there, it's going to drive up insurance costs if fires go up. It's going to cause a lot of economic problems. Maybe it would just be economically more feasible if we actually took care of people and cooperated. Just saying.
Horrific.
And some tents are now so big they not only block the sidewalks, but spill into the streets.
I think of the wheelchair-bound individual who does not have access to our sidewalks because it's blocked by tents.
Now you suddenly care about people in wheelchairs. I believe that people with wheelchairs should have every right to be able to use the sidewalks as necessary. I also believe that the people who are living in these tents are not the ones responsible for the problem. And to blame them is to blame the victims of capitalism. The people who have been somehow pushed to the side. They have agency, they have voice. Talk to them. They are not the ones being interviewed in this clip. If you've also noticed that, nobody's come up and been like, "Hey, you person who made a tent on the side of the road, what do you think about capitalism? What do you think about the situation you're in?" It's all about the fact that these people are made to be uncomfortable. And generally speaking, if you have a situation where somebody with a wheelchair needs to get through this street, I'm sure that they could find a way, using the street itself, as unfortunate as it is. And my heart does go out to that person also. Part of their accessibility is being removed in favor of capitalism's movement to preserve class systems. Again, who we're blaming in this argument is the wrong person for that person in the wheelchair not being able to use the sidewalks. And again, they suddenly care. They suddenly care now. Because now it's convenient. You're able to pull out that one instance where, somebody might be inconvenienced by this, who has a higher appeal to, a certain aesthetic. And you use that. That person is actually using the person in the wheelchair as a tool to attack people who don't have homes, as opposed to addressing the actual societal wound that is homelessness.
Under federal law, there has to be at least 36 inches between tents and the beginning of the street so wheelchairs can use the sidewalk. But as you can see, there's no room at all for wheelchairs to pass by.
We can't simply have the city turn its back, walk away, abdicate and surrender its jurisdiction over the sidewalks.
We emailed Mayor
We're more worried about the jurisdiction of the sidewalks than people's lives. Again, why don't you talk to the people? Why don't you find out what they're about?
Garcetti's office 8 times over the last month, asking to interview the mayor about these encampments at his soonest availability. His office said they're working on it, but still hasn't given us a time. What do you want to see the city doing?
Just like they're still sending inspectors to every single business to make sure that they're following code, why aren't we doing the same with the public right-of-way?
Estela Lopez called
With the public what? I missed that completely.
Its jurisdiction over the sidewalks.
We emailed Mayor Garcia a time.
Why aren't we doing the same with the public right-of-way?
Estela Lopez
I can't understand what she's saying. The public something.
called the city over and over about that huge tent with the shower that was blocking the sidewalk. Sanitation workers finally came and took it down.
Oh my
Even though
goodness.
that tent is gone, many other McMansion tents are popping up all across LA.
You just completely destroyed that person's home. What about What about that immorality? Forget the law for a second. You literally were watching someone's home be removed without any sort of consent or conversation. That has no argument here. There is no justification for that. None. There is no justification for the removal of that person's home.
About that huge tent with the shower that was blocking the sidewalk. Sanitation workers finally came and took it down.
They finally came and took it down. There is somebody who took a lot of time and resource to try to hook up a working shower and to find a way to feed themselves and maybe some of their neighbors. And their goal here, instead of actually talking to this person and finding out how we can help deal with the ill situation that is nobody being comfortable in this situation, right? Nobody's comfortable with this. We just remove the house, move them off, Move along. Go find a way to deal with your problems elsewhere. You don't get rights here. And with that said, my name is Anarchistara. I value the fact that I have a roof over my head. I think more people should have a roof over their head. If you think that people should have a roof over their head, feel free to comment down below. I appreciate all the comments, and I hope you enjoyed this video.